All right. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this Veterans Day. My name is Megan Sauter, and I'm the Museum Programs Administrator for the Kentucky Historical Society. And so we oversee the Kentucky Military History Museum in Frankfort, Kentucky. And as a part of that, we have a Kentucky Military History Museum virtual speaker series. And I have with me Kevin Callahan, and he is going to talk about his book, Brother in Arms, Remembering Brothers Buried Side by Side in America, World War II Cemeteries. And so we are excited to have him here. He's going to discuss this book for about 30 minutes, and then we'll have questions afterwards. And then I'll also send out the recording to everybody too. All right.
Excellent.
Can take
Well,
it
thank
away,
you, Megan.
Kevin.
And thank you to the Kentucky Historical Society for hosting me on this Veterans Day. So very special to be with you all here today. So a little bit about my background. Come on now. So I'm not a veteran myself, but my dad is a veteran of the U.S. Air Force. He was too young for World War II in Korea, but he served in the Air Force during the late 1950s. But we grew up hearing stories about my dad's uncle, Uncle Harry. Crazy Uncle Harry was a paratrooper in World War II, volunteered. We never heard many stories about Uncle Harry jumping out of airplanes. It was mostly about all the trouble that Uncle Harry got in. Harry was the youngest of 11 children from the south side of Chicago. And let's just say there's not a lot of supervision by the time you get to 11. And so he got in a lot of trouble. But we also heard stories about my mother's Uncle Rudy. He's on the far left there. And he was in his 40s and married with kids when he served in World War II because he was a surgeon and there was such a demand for medical personnel. And the one story we heard about Uncle Rudy is he once had to remove a live shell out of a patient. And they had to set up a separate operating tent far from everyone else because they didn't know at any point if the shell was going to go off. Anyway, he got the shell out, rescued the patient. But the story we always heard about Uncle Rudy is after the war, he never practiced medicine again. And so it does show that sometimes the scars of war are more than just physical. So I grew up hearing these stories, learning about the war in school, but I got a chance to go over to Europe right after graduating from college. I actually got invited to play in a American football game in Romania, of all places, but it gave me a chance to travel around Europe, and I was backpacking through France and went to the Normandy American Cemetery. And I captured this picture of Sergeant Frank McNally and kind of the import of the war kind of made sense to me at that point. And it occurred to me that Sergeant Frank McNally was probably about my age at the time he died. And it was only through the sacrifice of people like him that I was able to travel through a free and prosperous Europe some 50 years later. So that photo's hung on my wall ever since. And then about fast forward 18 years, now I'm married. I have three boys of my own. And I discovered, as I think a lot of Americans don't fully realize, there's a lot of other World War II cemeteries. And so we were traveling in Italy, and I saw there were two American cemeteries there for World War II. And I said, let's go to them both. So we went to the Sicily Rome American Cemetery, and the main statue there is a soldier and sailor walking arm in arm, and the statue is actually titled Brothers in Arms. And then I captured this unscripted photo of my two oldest boys walking arm in arm through the grave sites. And then we came across this. I noticed there were two brothers or two burial markers with the same last name, both from Iowa. And I thought, I wonder if those are brothers. And I talked to the cemetery superintendent, and he explained that, yeah, those are brothers. And in fact, they had a policy after the war to try to bury brothers side by side. And so now I'm not thinking about Sergeant Frank McNally as the father of three boys. I'm thinking about those parents. And so that for me kind of became the inspiration to kind of find and tell the stories of all these brothers. So the way this worked is after the war, there were hundreds of temporary cemeteries around the world. And it was really up to the families. They could either have the remains repatriated to the United States, or they could choose to have them buried at one of these overseas cemeteries. And about 60% chose repatriation, and about 40% chose overseas burial. The result of which is about 90,000 fallen American service members who are buried at one of these 14 permanent American World War II cemeteries. Most of these are in Europe. Eisenhower did not want any cemeteries on foreign soil. So there's none in Germany, there's none in Japan. Obviously, there's a number in France, There's two in Italy, North Africa, England, and of course, Netherlands and Belgium as well, including Luxembourg. There's just one American cemetery in the Pacific. It's in Manila, in the Philippines, although it is the largest of the World War II cemeteries, with about 16,000 burials. So, if you ever get a chance to visit any of these cemeteries, they are supreme places to visit. They're maintained by what's called the American Battle Monuments Commission, and they do an incredible job of taking care of these cemeteries. And anytime a family member shows up to visit the gravesite, they really roll out the red carpet for them. So I've actually organized the book by cemetery. It was very interesting to go into each of these cemeteries and learn about the different designers and landscape architects and artists and architects they would bring together. And each one of them is unique. And there was a different team brought together for each of these cemeteries. So they're really quite extraordinary. The first step in doing the project was to kind of put together a list. And I worked very closely with the American Battle Monuments Commission, but they didn't really have like a comprehensive list of all the brothers buried overseas. So I had to sort of build that list from scratch. I worked with a lot of the individual cemeteries. And so this map shows you there's about 250 total sets of brothers. I have a list at the back of the book of all the brothers buried side by side in it. We eventually expanded the list to include brothers who are not just buried side by side, but who might be at the same cemetery, just not next to each other, or in some cases at different cemeteries. So this just gives you a snapshot of kind of where those brothers were from, kind of their hometowns. And so this more or less reflects kind of the population of 1940. So it's very heavy kind of Northeast, Southeast, Midwest. As you get out to the rest of the country, it gets a little bit more dispersed. But as you can see, these brothers really came from kind of every corner of the country. And then I really set about trying to contact surviving family members. So you go to these cemeteries, it's row after row of white burial markers, and I really wanted to put a face to the name. And to do that, I wanted to get in touch with family members to collect photos, artifacts, and even personal memories of the brothers. So we really try to get in touch with all 250 sets of brothers, but it can be challenging trying to track families down 75, 80 years later. We were successful in about a quarter of cases. So there's 72 sets of brothers who are profiled in the book. And the best part about the project was getting out and meeting with these families. So I went to 35 different states all across the country and met with family members. And thankfully, I did all this work from kind of 2018 to kind of right before COVID started in 2020, because it was very important to do this work in person. You really needed to show up at their homes, scan the images on site, and do these interviews with them. So that was really the best part of the project. I was very fortunate to find a great guy to design the book. Jerry Takagawa is a photographer and an artist, and he also designs books. And he has his own World War II story. He's Japanese American. His parents were in an internment camp during World War II. And so it's similar to a story we have in the book about the Akimoto brothers, who are Japanese American brothers from Los Angeles. And he did a really amazing job. I think there's something like 700 original photos and artifacts in the book. And Jerry did an amazing job kind of putting that together. So he built a lot of these collages and things, which I think really made it look great. So I published the book in the summer of 2020, kind of right during COVID. Was never able to do a book tour. And so just this summer, I did a pretty extensive book tour throughout the country. And then obviously I'm doing some of these virtual events as well. So let's talk a little bit about some of the sets of brothers from Kentucky. Um, with 72 sets of brothers, there's many states that don't have any brothers profiled in the book. And so to get three from the state of Kentucky is relatively quite a few. And so there's three sets. The Flynn brothers, who are from a small town called Irvine, Kentucky. The Leach brothers, who are from Ashland, and the Zaki brothers from High Splint. And they have three things in common. One, they're from Kentucky. Two, they're brothers who died in the war and are buried side by side overseas. And three, the families answered my call, right? So the families all agreed. I was able to track them down and participate in the project. So the Flynn brothers were from Irvine, Kentucky, actually from a very small outpost called Station Camp. So this is Marie Flynn Shacklet. She's a niece of the brothers, and she told me a little bit about the Flynn brothers going up. If you go to the 1930 U.S. Census and look up the Flynn family, you'll find them living in this rural outpost called Station Camp. And There's no house number and there's no street name. It simply says dirt road. And Marie told me it was, one of those hill country farms. They had 9 children, and it basically grew enough food for them to live on. And so the Flynn brothers, Turner Flynn served in the 357th Infantry Regiment, 90th Infantry Division, and they were both Turner and Ray were drafted in 1943. And Turner was killed on July 9th, 1944, something called this is in the Cotentin Peninsula, right? So this is about a month after D-Day. And so they're trying to clear this peninsula from the Nazi army. And there was this especially horrific battle near a town called Beaucoudroy. And the Germans had put in one of their best divisions. The 15th Panzer Parachute Regiment was there. And the 357th lost something like there were 850 casualties and about 166 killed over what was described as 6 bloody days. And sadly, one of those was Turner Flynn, died on July 9th, 1944, but was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. So if you go back and look at that photo, that one on the left is a Distinguished Service Cross. You don't see too many of those. The Distinguished Service Cross is second highest award in the U.S. Army, and so you don't see a lot of those. Ray served in the First Infantry Division. It was called the First for a reason. The First was there from really the beginning of the war all the way through the end. So serving with the 16th Infantry Regiment, I think they were in combat something like 400 days. And so Ray made it quite a bit, through the landings at Normandy, through the Hurtgen Forest, through the Battle of the Bulge. And they actually crossed the Rhine River on March 16th, 1945. And Ray was killed just 9 days later on March 25th. And he was awarded the Purple Heart. So that picture there shows you the crossing of the bridge in Remagen. And so the Flynn brothers are buried today at the Henri Chapelle American Cemetery in Belgium. Next, we have the Leach brothers, who are from Ashland, Kentucky. That's Ronna Geyer, who is a niece also of the brothers, and her husband Roy, who is a veteran. He actually was in the U.S. Navy SEALs. And so some families, like Marie Flynn, only had those 2 photos of the boys. That's all she really had, along with their medals. Rana really has an amazing collection of artifacts and things. And so both that globe is a globe that the boys had in their room, and that painting is one painted by one of the brothers. She also has an amazing collection of letters from the brothers. And so she just has this kind of extraordinary collection. The Leach family was, at least for the Great Depression standards, fairly well off. Their father was a foreman at what was called the Cemet Solvay company that made coke for steel furnaces. And they moved around a bit. They were in Wheeling, West Virginia. Then they were in Buffalo, New York, and then finally settled in Ashland, Kentucky. And they were college boys, the 2 Leach brothers. Lawrence was a student at Ohio Wesleyan, and Ralph was a student at Marshall College, and they both left college to serve in the war effort. And they both joined early. Lawrence joined in 1940, and his brother Ralph joined the following year, 1941. And so that's well before Pearl Harbor, well before the United States was in the war. So Lawrence served as a B-17 on a B-17 bomber crew. If you see the day he died in 1943, being on a B-17 bomber crew in 1943 was one of the most dangerous jobs you could have in the U.S. military. He was shot down. Originally, they thought he may have been a prisoner of war. He was originally listed as missing. Ultimately, his remains were found, and neither of those things was true. So he was killed and shot down on April 16th and was awarded an Air Medal. Ralph was the more adventurous one. That was his globe growing up. So Rana says that, he wanted to see the world. And that's why he joined the U.S. Army Air Forces. He served with a unit that was based out of Morocco and got to send home these amazing artifacts from Morocco. So it was certainly less dangerous than flying on a B-17 bomber, but still had its own risks. If you were on a bomber crew, they would count the number of missions, and if you got to 25, usually you could go home. In this case, it was calculated based on hours. So originally, if you got 1,000 hours of flying time, you could return home. They eventually bumped that up to 1,500. which was okay for Ralph for a while, according to the letters he sent home. But as he got to about 1400 hours, his plane was struck by lightning and crashed, and he was killed in September 1944. And so the Leach brothers are buried at the Brittany American Cemetery in France. And as you can see here, sometimes the brothers died in very different locations, but they would be brought together after the war and buried next to each other. So finally, we have the Zaki brothers. I got to meet Bill Zaki, who was a younger brother of the Zaki brothers, and he died just 2 years ago, I think at the age of 97. And Bill wanted mostly to talk not as much about the war, but about what it was like to grow up in this town called High Splint, Kentucky, which was a company-owned coal town. And he said the company ruled it with an iron fist. And so, if you've read or seen any movies about the Harlan County Wars in the 1930s, you'll get a little bit of a sense of kind of what he went through. And he said his brothers joined the war so that they wouldn't die in a coal mine. And they both this is Bill's dad, Asuero. Asuero Zaki was from northern Italy near the Alps. And they had these paid recruiters that would go around and try to recruit people to come and work in these coal towns. And so Asuero got one of these pamphlets and came to High Splint in the 1920s. And as he was there, he met a Kentucky farm girl. He saw her at a party, and he told his friends that one day she was going to be his wife. And even though she was dating another man at the time, sure enough, Sarah Wright became his wife, and they went on to have 6 children. These are just the 4 oldest. And so, interestingly, the Zaki brothers also joined the war very early. Most likely, sadly, their mother had died in 1938. And so their father was trying to raise the kids on his own. It's the Great Depression. They probably joined the war to have a steady job. So they also both joined in 1940. Pete Zaki was 24 years old when he joined up, and his younger brother John joined up a week later. He was only 15 years old. And so I think of all the brothers profiled in the book, John Zaki is the youngest. He lied about his age. He added two year rather than saying he was born in 24. He said he was born in 22. And if you were 17 years old, you could join the army if your parents agreed to it. So he was really 15. He said he was 17. His dad agreed to it. And so John Zaki, at the age of 15, joined the war, if you can imagine that. Now, by 1944, they are both battlefield veterans. And as you can see here, they both, John Zaki, who's not even 20 years old yet, rose to the rank of a staff sergeant. He was on a tank destroyer battalion. He was a tank driver. And Pete Zaki rose to the level of corporal. And just one of the quirks of fate, they both died on the same day, December 29th, 1944, but in very different places. And if you know what was going on at that time, it was right during the Battle of the Bulge. And this gives you a sense of just how those reverberations from the Battle of the Bulge kind of stretched around. And as I said up front, Bill Zaki said his brothers joined, they joined the army so they wouldn't die in a coal mine. Sadly, that's exactly how their dad died in November 1944, just a month before they died. So they today are buried at the Netherlands American Cemetery, which has this amazing graves adoption program. Some of these cemeteries have that, where local citizens.
Did we lose Kevin? Let's see if he comes back in. I thought it was my internet for a second.
I don't think it was just you.
We'll give him one more minute because I was finding this very interesting. And oh, there he is. Perfect.
Sorry about that,
Thank you.
Megan.
You're good. I was calling you, so I'm making you co-host again.
Sorry, yeah, we had some power glitch here or something that just everything went.
Yeah. No, Kevin's in New York City right now, streaming in. So, all right. So you're good to share your screen again.
Okay. All right. Sorry about that. Yeah, so I was just mentioning the Zaki brothers are buried side by side at the Netherlands American Cemetery. And I thought I might just read the last part from the Zaki brothers, which includes a little song. So William, that's William Zaki. William does remember some happy times at High Splint when the whole family would gather together on the front porch to sing songs. One of those songs he remembers was an old Civil War tune called Just Before the Battle Mother. Just before the battle, mother, I'm thinking most of you, while upon the field we're watching with the enemy in view. Comrades brave round me lying, filled with thoughts of home and God, for well they know that on the morrow some will sleep beneath the sod. Farewell, mother, you may never press me to your breast again, but oh, you'll never forget me, mother, if I'm numbered with the slain. Hark, I hear the bugle sounding, 'tis the signal for the fight. Now may God protect us, mother, as he ever does the right. Hear the battle cry of freedom, how it swells up in the air. Yes, we'll rally round the standard, or we'll perish nobly there. Farewell, mother, you may never press me to your heart again, but oh, you'll not forget me, mother, if I'm numbered with the slain. So, what was it all for? Um, you'll go to these cemeteries, again, it's kind of row after row of these white burial markers, and you'll hear people say, what a waste. And in many ways, it is a waste of so many young lives. But after visiting these American cemeteries, I had the opportunity in 2019 to go to Auschwitz-Birkenau, which is one of the Nazi death camps. And it's somewhat unusual. Most of the Nazi death camps were destroyed completely by the retreating German army to kind of destroy the evidence. But in this case, the Soviet army arrived much sooner than they expected. And so Auschwitz-Birkenau stands today largely as it did exactly in 1945. And, I've read the books about the Holocaust and seen the photos and documentary films, and I've seen testimony of Holocaust survivors, but there's nothing quite like seeing the sort of visions of this horror for yourself. And anyway, I just walked away from that experience really knowing that none of those lives were wasted, that every single one of the 400,000 Americans who died in World War II did so for a very noble and worthy cause. And there were those at the time who recognized that, so I told you I was inspired to write this book thinking about the families of these brothers or the parents of these brothers. And so I'll finish with a story of one of those parents. This is Anna Trimmer White. She was a single mother, raised 8 children on her own in the Great Depression in Salem, Ohio. And she lost not only 2 sons in World War II, but she lost a third son in the Korean War. And she was really this beloved figure. She lived to be like 98 years old, and everyone knew her in Salem. And a newspaper reporter asked her some years later, what was that like to lose, 3 sons in 2 wars? And her response was, naturally, I feel deeply they are gone. But if the sacrifice they have made will keep liberty alive, not only in this country, but in the rest of the world, their lives were not wasted. And I have to tell you, I agree with Anna Trimmer White. There's a lot of stories in this book about bravery and courage and just utter selflessness. And I can think of none braver and none more courageous and none more selfless than Anna Trimmer White. So thank you for having me today on Veterans Day. I appreciate it.
Yes, thank you, Kevin. I have to say something unique about your research is that you were able to go and meet all of these family members. And I think it just shows a deeper emotional connection, I'm sure, when reading your book too.
Yeah, for sure. Part of that at the beginning, I think, was just because I wanted to put a face to the name, right? You'll see these burial markers, they've got a name and a death date. So I really wanted to get photos and artifacts. But to your point, it was pretty special and meaningful to really meet with the families, especially people like Bill Zaki and others who knew these brothers personally. I read books about the war and watch movies, and sometimes it can seem like it's distant history, but to many of these people, it's like the war happened yesterday because in their minds, it did.
Yeah. All right. Do we have any questions for Kevin? If you want to unmute yourself, you can, or if you want to use the chat box, I can read it from there too. And Kevin, if you can see the chat box, we had some people commenting. Fanny grew up next to the Normandy American Cemetery.
Oh, amazing.
And she's asking, where can we find your book?
Oh, so it's available on Amazon. You can also order from our website, which is brothersinarmsbook.com.
And then we
maybe
have
some bookstores.
Go ahead.
No, I was just saying thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome.
And then Lori said, such an important project of remembrance. Thank you. What made you only focus on overseas burials?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, again, I was kind of inspired by that trip that I took and this sort of tradition of burying brothers next to each other. Um, I wasn't, I didn't know how many there were when I sort of had this original idea. As I said, it ended up being about 250 sets. One advantage of the overseas cemeteries is there's a database that the American Battle Monuments Commission maintains. And so it was actually easier for me to kind of find and track down these brothers. So there were a number of brothers died in the war, and a number of brothers would have been returned home and buried in the United States. But it's much harder to track them down because there's no sort of comprehensive list. And so, as I said, I was sort of inspired by these overseas cemeteries. I could have access to the list and ultimately sort of build from there. And it ended up being kind of a large enough number that even if I wasn't able to track them all down, I would be able to track down a sufficient number. And I think too, there's something about, these cemeteries can sometimes to Americans seem a little bit like out of sight, out of mind. And so I was very interested in kind of taking the stories of these brothers who are buried overseas and kind of bringing them home, if you will. Like if you go to the Netherlands, as I said, they have this extensive graves adoption program. There's 8,000 Americans buried at the Netherlands American Cemetery. All 8,000 have some local townsperson who's adopted the grave, who bring flowers, and many of them have passed it from one generation to the next. There's 1,800 names on the walls of the missing. Every single one of those 1,800 names has someone who's adopted it. And so I always tell people, if you want to go to places in the world where they really appreciate liberty and those who helped give them that liberty, go to places that didn't have it for a while. And that was certainly the Netherlands, who not only was it occupied by the Nazis during World War II, but for the last part of the war, the southern part of the Netherlands was liberated by the Americans, and they were living in peace and freedom. And then the northern part of the Netherlands, they were starving to death in the streets. And so places like that really appreciate, they don't forget, they don't need Veterans Day and Memorial Day to remember because many of them have passed those stories on from generation to the next. And so we didn't have that experience in World War II. And so sometimes in the United States, we can forget. And so I was interested in kind of bringing these stories that sometimes might seem a little bit forgotten because they're resting in some foreign soil and bringing those stories and just reminding people about the sacrifice and about these amazing resting places. So, but I am always interested in finding stories of brothers who are buried here. Now and then I come across people who say, I know there's again, if we take a rough example of that 60-40 split, if I've got 250 sets of brothers buried overseas, or say 280, there's 300 or 400 sets at least of brothers who are buried somewhere in the United States.
And then Addie was asking, can you go over what the grave adoption system looks like?
Yeah, there's a sidebar in the book where I talk a little bit about that, but it really started kind of right after the war, where these local townspeople would just adopt a grave site, and so they bring flowers on the death date. If they know the birth date, they might show up for that day, and they often try to get in touch with family members in the United States. And so it's a little bit complicated because of privacy issues. The American Battle Monuments Commission can't kind of share information. But in the world of social media, a lot of people have connected. And I've one of the great things about the project is I've often been able to connect the family members that I know with the people in the Netherlands who've adopted the grave. And so some other cemeteries have graves adoption programs, but it's the most extensive and the most supported in the Netherlands.
And do you know if the tradition of burying brothers next to each other happens in other American conflicts, such as the Civil War or Vietnam War?
Really good question. I don't know about the Civil War, and probably the answer to that is yes, because it was really the Civil War really started kind of the national cemetery system. Um, and so that was the first time kind of the American government started, building national military cemeteries. And obviously today there's a network of military cemeteries. I have looked at World War I, and there's very few examples in World War I of brothers buried next to each other. It required a fair bit of kind of coordination, to do this. As I said, there were hundreds of these temporary cemeteries around the world. And so the government they needed to know that they're brothers, which usually they found out from the family. So often the families requested, hey, we want the brothers buried next to each other. And if you saw one of those first slides that I showed, there was actually a stamp that the government had where they would stamp, it would say brothers on it. And then they would know that these brothers are supposed to be next to each other. And so it was really by World War II when they had sort of the wherewithal to kind of be organized enough and identify brothers and then be able to place them actually next to each other. Because I know for World War I, there's very few examples. Korea and Vietnam are interesting, right? Because there was, partly because of air travel and partly because of the nature of those conflicts. There hasn't been an overseas cemetery built since World War II. But certainly, if brothers died in either Korea or the Vietnam War, they would have been returned home and buried, either at a family cemetery, at a national cemetery, at a church cemetery, and most likely, certainly, they would be buried next to each other.
Did you have a particular focus for the stories you told, or a particular set of questions, or the information you wanted to gather from the families when you met with them?
Yeah, it's a really good question because there's a lot of material to get into the book. As I said, there's like 700 photographs and artifacts in the book, and there's 72 sets of brothers. And so, and by the way, the book is very portable. Originally, I thought it would be a coffee table book, but I'm glad I did it as a smaller size. And so the book is kind of it's easy to carry with you. And so I really like the format of it, but you were limited in how much you could say about each set of brothers. And so, because many of them, you could write a book about them. And so, I either had like 500 words or maybe 800 words to sort of tell the story of these brothers. And so you can't really tell their whole story. And so what I try to do is a little bit, I started my career kind of in the newspaper business. And so what a good newspaper editor would say, well, what's the story, right? And so I would try to bring out the interesting part of each story, and for some like Bill Zaki, it might be where they grew up. They grew up in this coal town, and that's kind of what he wanted, to kind of talk about. But it might be their wartime experience that was the most interesting, or it could be, something about, you know, the hometown that they were from or something like that. So with each set, so I would try to suss out what is what's the prevailing theme that I want to kind of focus on for each of those? Because you couldn't tell the full story. And so that's essentially what I try to do, is just sort of bring that out. But yeah, I think I would ask kind of the same questions of families, and collect whatever artifacts that I could. Some families had great number of artifacts and had a lot of information about the brothers, like Ronna Geyer. She had all their letters. But I tracked down one guy in Chicago, and he had a photo of two men in uniform, and I don't even know how I tracked them down. And he said, I don't know who they are or how I'm related to them. And so we had to sort of piece it together. We could tell by the arm badge which was which brother, but I had to sort of build their story just using public sources. And we were able to kind of find a fair bit, but it just depended on the different family. They happened to be only children, right? And so there were no surviving siblings to kind of bring that story forward. And so here he was just with that photo, but again, we could kind of tell their story as well.
Mm-hmm. And to add on to that, were you able to give the families info they did not have before, service information, or a bigger picture concerning any circumstances of their death?
Yeah, definitely. There were definitely some examples of that. There was one, I'm doing a talk later this week about some brothers from Pittsburgh, and one of them are the Chinchilla brothers. And it was, that was a case where the family never really knew the circumstances of how one of the brothers had died. And I was able to kind of go into it. And it turns out, he was murdered by two German citizens. And the reason why we know so much about it is because they were actually part of a war crimes trial, after the war. And so, there were two German citizens who were convicted of murdering this. It was a pilot. And so there were times like that. And as I said, like this other example where this guy didn't know anything about these brothers and how he was related to them. So there were times when I was able to find stuff out that they didn't know. I would say usually able to find something that they didn't know. But in other cases, they had quite a bit of information.
All right. Does anybody else have any other questions? And Kevin said that you can find his book on Amazon. Oh, one more question. Is the Pittsburgh Talk something we can attend?
Yes. It's called the Veterans Breakfast Club. And Megan, I can send you a link to that.
Okay. And when I
um,
send out this Zoom recording, I can add it to it.
Yeah, and I'll try to post it on social media as well. Our social handle is like Brothers in Arms Book. And I'm not very savvy at social media, but hopefully I can figure that out. But I'm going to try to post that. It's Thursday around the same time. I think it starts at 7, even though it's called Veterans Breakfast, it starts at 7 p.m. So
All right. Well, thank you so much, Kevin.
thank you. Thank you everyone for
bringing this
joining. And thanks again to the
presentation.
Kentucky
Yes.
Historical Society.
Yes, we appreciate it so much. And everybody's saying thank you too. So
Awesome.
good work.
Thanks everybody. Have a great night.
You too.